Let us pray. O God, you made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love, and work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your purposes on earth, that in your good time, all nations and races may serve you in harmony around your heavenly throne. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
And with that, I'll just make one more announcement, and that is, if you haven't already heard this, if you haven't been to church yet, church at 10:30, you'll hear a little more about sacred ground, which you may have already heard about. That will be the follow-up to this forum series. We will start signing up for sacred ground next week. That will be a 10-part small group conversation that will begin signups for next week. So we'll talk a little bit about that more next week, but I just want to let you know that we'll start signups for that next week. So it's coming, and keep your eyes open for that in the e-bulletin, and as we talk more about that in the days to come. With that, I'll turn it over to Robbi.
Thank you, Jeff. And good morning, everybody. And this is session number 4 that we're in. I trust everyone can hear me. If so, just a nod. Well, thank you. I've had issues before, so thank you. Also, just a quick comment, our virtual vergers will mute everyone if they haven't done so already. So if you haven't muted, you will be muted. And also, quite frankly, you know, we learned a lot from our last session where there were some takeaways that we don't want to lose sight of. I'll walk through those very briefly in just a moment. But if you will, allow me to go through a few norms that we do whenever we're having a Zoom conversation of this type. So bear with me. But first and foremost, please honor the importance of the conversation. Knowing that this is a sensitive topic, this may be uncomfortable. Please find a way to sit with your discomfort. It's important that you speak for yourself and respect what others say. You don't have to agree. And you are not required to speak if you don't want to. We want you to share from your own experience when appropriate, and you can leave the breakout room at any time. You can ask for help while in a breakout room, and a verger will come to see you. Our virtual vergers are on the lookout for anyone who seems upset, and also may looking out for if there's any inappropriate behavior, which we doubt that would happen. And this, please, at the base of this is a journey, and we are all on it together. None of us have all the answers, and all of us have many things to learn, and in some ways, many questions. So with that, I would like to share with you some brief takeaways from our first 2 sessions, actually. Well, excuse me, our first 3 sessions. One is that all of you have kind of, by one way or another, it kind of demonstrated an interest in having more time to have discussion. And we will continue to honor that and try to make sure that we allow 20 minutes for discussion today. And also, what was a kind of interesting takeaway from last time, or last session, is that parties literally enjoyed having a chance to speak to the larger plenary group again, post the breakout rooms. So we will try to do that as well. There are many other pieces here that I'll just be real brief on. One is that we have learned that for many of you, at least you have shared that race, or the topic of race, was not necessarily the cornerstone of your upbringing, that you may not have been in diverse settings that often, and that in many ways, at least from the early onset, you know, in many ways, we are all experiencing race in the same way, but still for many, indicating that this was not part, or at least not until hindsight, this was really not a perceived part of their early upbringing. So we'll move into a few things right now. I think perhaps the easiest way for us to proceed is that I want to share with you a brief CBS Morning video on understanding white privilege. That video has Robbi Ewell and also another author, Ibram X. Kendi, who will be providing a few comments that I think will enliven our conversation. Hopefully it will play well.
Our special coverage of Race for Justice continues with a new CBS News poll showing how Americans' view on racial discrimination are shifting. More than half of Americans believe that white people have a better chance of getting ahead in today's society. That's compared with black people. And now that's up 13 points from 2015. Nationwide protests against inequality are encouraging more people to have discussions, not only about race, but also white privilege. Robbi Ewell is a sociologist, and she's author of this book, White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. I love this title. She joins us with the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, CBS News contributor Ibram X. Kendi. Both of them join us this morning. Good to see you both. Robin, I'm going to start with you. In your book, you write this: unless white people have ongoing and intentional study, their opinions will be uninformed and ignorant. I read that and I thought, whoa, very blunt language. So I would like you to explain what white privilege is exactly and why white people have such a hard time seeing it, because it's so clear to most black people I know.
Certainly, and thank you for having me. White privilege is the automatic, taken for granted advantage bestowed upon white people as a result of living in a society based on the premise of white as the human ideal, and that from its founding established white advantage as a matter of law, and today as a matter of policy and practice. And it doesn't matter if you agree with it, if you want it, if you even are aware of it, it's 24/7, 365. And one of the reasons why it's so hard for white people to see it, well, there are many reasons, but one is it serves us not to see it. We come to feel entitled to that advantage. We're told that we deserve it and that we earned it. And we take great umbrage when that is challenged.
You write too, Robin, in the book that kids from the age between 3 and 4 are intuitively taught that being white is better, that you are superior. I thought that that was an interesting thing, but I find many white Americans today say, listen, I struggle too. I don't have white privilege. What are you talking about?
And I'm really clear that I'm not saying that white people don't struggle or face barriers or work hard, but there's a major barrier in this society, racism, that we don't struggle with. And not struggling against that barrier actually helps us navigate the barriers that we do struggle with. You grew up in poverty. How has being white shaped how you experience poverty and how you get out of poverty, if you do get out of poverty? Again, it's not saying that white Americans don't work hard, but it's a bit like being a fish in a current that impacts the outcome of that work. There's a kind of moving along that amplifies that work. And for people of color, for black people, you're swimming against a current. And we're both working, we're both swimming, but there's such a different impact on the outcome of that effort.
Ibram, what are the questions that you think white Americans should be asking these days? And I say this because I don't know any black friend of mine that hasn't gotten calls from white people all around saying, I don't know what to do, I want to help, I want to be supportive. A black male friend of mine in Texas said for the first time he was invited on the company retreat, and he's been there 10 years with, his coworkers seeking him out. What are the questions white Americans should be asking?
Well, I think many white Americans claim they believe in racial equality. And so the way you put that to the test is by asking questions about racial disparities. So why is it that unarmed black people are killed by police too many times and armed white people are simply arrested? Why is it in Minneapolis that black people are 20% of the population, but 60% of the victims of police shootings? Why is it that the black unemployment rate is twice as high as the white unemployment rate? And there's only two answers. Either there's something wrong with black people there's something superior about white people or racism.
Ibram, you've said that to end white privilege, you have to deal with racism first, right?
Yes, yeah, and I mean, as Robin, talked about, it is critical for white people, for people in general, to stop denying their racist ideas, to stop denying the ways in which policies have benefited them, to stop denying their racism, and to realize that actually the heartbeat of racism itself is denial, and the sound of that heartbeat is, I'm not racist.
Robin, do you believe that white folks actually care about racial injustice?
It doesn't appear that we do. If you look at what it takes to wake us up, when you look at the explosion of umbrage white people take from the simple claim that Black Lives Matter, from somebody respectfully going down on their knee, all of the outrage about that, and then it takes us literally seeing a man being murdered in front of our eyes to wake us up. That's a really high price to pay for our enlightenment. And it just, I wonder what will happen when all the cameras go away and there's another issue in front of us. If we don't put something in place to keep our attention and our focus here. I mean, the status quo of our society is racism, and it's comfortable for white people. And so we're not going to get there from a place of white comfort. We're going to have to get mighty uncomfortable and inconvenienced. And it appears to me that in 20 years of working with white people, that if it requires anything of us like discomfort or inconvenience, we don't seem to be particularly motivated to do anything.
Robin DiAngelo, Ibram X. Kendi, thank you both for being with us.
Thank you for enduring the technical glitch there. But I thought that particular segment from CBS Morning News was worth watching. There's a lot to unpack there, but it's also very consistent in the things that we are reading in Debbie Irving's work. And one of the things that I think we noticed, probably as you've gone through the chapter, you probably noticed that in different ways, I'll just use one term that would pop in there, is that even to some degree, there is some degree of defending the status quo. We have, for lack of a better term, the use of microaggressions that Debbie alluded to in many ways. Some of them are degrees of just being uncomfortable, so different things are said to people of different diverse backgrounds. Some of it actually is a reflection of our own cultural awareness and competence to some degree. And something that I'll just bring up briefly, and we'll have a chance to maybe hear more about it in the breakout rooms, is the introduction of things such as the race card. Many of you probably heard that, like someone's invoking or playing the race card. Often it is when, and from my vantage point, and may not be the only vantage point, it's often when someone is saying that somehow bringing these uncomfortable things up is playing on one's sympathy, or to some degree we have to defend white privilege with the race card. That's brought up as something that I don't want to play that game. I personally will say I find it very insulting whenever I hear that. I've not had it directed at me directly as the recipient, but it is an interesting thing, because the question is, what would one be defending, at least from my point of view? There's probably many other examples like that, where there seems to be a defense of not wanting to deal with these sometimes uncomfortable topics. Sometimes it's just not having the edge or the leverage, being the one in control. And so, in terms of dealing with our fellow human beings, sometimes these things are used as levers to pull that, in a sense, really can tie back to racism in our society. Now, I actually would love to have a chance for many of you to speak out on that, sound out on as you feel appropriate. And we are going to move to our breakout rooms with 3 questions, reflection questions. So bear with me, and I think the questions will be made available to you also in the breakout room. But question number 1, how would you characterize your level of cultural awareness and competency when communicating with a diverse audience? I'll repeat, how would you characterize your level of cultural awareness and competency, in this case, cultural competency, when communicating with a diverse audience? Question number 2, in your view, are the recent declarations stated by a number of corporations and businesses in their pledge to help combat racial injustice, do you find them authentic or self-serving, or both? And why do you think this is happening at this time? And question number 3, what can or should we do in our own lives to address racism? That's a loaded question. We'll never get to the end of that in a 20-minute breakout session. But just to start the beginning of that conversation, what can or should we do in our own lives to address racism? Those are the 3 questions. We're going to break for the breakout rooms. Bear with our virtues are going to be moving you out there in just a few minutes. It may take about a minute or 2 to get to your respective location. After that, we'll come back and we'll actually have an opportunity for parties to share their opinions. Okay, so
excuse me, I'm going to just go ahead and mute everybody, and then Robbi, if you can unmute yourself to speak, that'll be great. Thank you. Give me 1 second.
Thank you, Jen.
You're welcome.
Okay, so good conversations. Thank you so much for participating in that. Some really quick takeaways that I'll just touch on, and then we would like to hear what some of you have to say, so please bear with us. The interesting issue of cultural competency and cultural awareness, we actually have been hearing a few things and I think this is a relatively enlightened group, if not a greatly enlightened group. So obviously we're preaching to the choir, pardon the pun, but in many ways, there's also the issue of whether parties that already feel this is for I think I heard it characterized as, is this a baby boomer issue? Because we're already awoke if we're younger. That younger generations have perhaps different sensibilities because they've actually have seen, or as they've grown into living in our contradictions of society, that they have already started to take action. I'll use an example of with the unfortunate shooting in Florida. The high school students literally started a movement on their own about, in this case, gun control, because they saw a contradiction in terms of how this is playing out in their real lives, and that they lost members and they've been traumatized. They did not have to wait for us, our generations, I'm among the baby boomers and others, to tell them how to respond. They responded. Actually, they responded in a most eloquent manner and highly effective. This current round of social unrest and protest is also responding to seeing a horror right before our eyes, which was actually part of and continues to be part of an unfortunate trend of Black lives not mattering enough to and dying senselessly because in this case, under the hands of law enforcement. As it turns out, some of us already were awakened to that, but now we are seeing an awakening to the extent that even businesses, corporations, and others have decided we need to get on board. And I have to tell you, I've seen some promotions and I've looked at it with a jaded eye. I really thought about it like, well, that's hypocritical, or that's really an odd thing coming from this company. But what I also have to say, and this is where I'm conflicted, is that they use the best marketing firms to work with, and frankly, the messages are absolutely compelling. So in a sense, because someone is finally doing the right thing, from my vantage point, do I disregard what's been done or not done in the past? Or should I also acknowledge that this is a small victory? And to the question of whether it's authentic, we know that in many regards, when it comes to branding and businesses and marketing, authentic is in the eye of the beholder. But is it effective, and is it emblematic that things are changing and that corporations and others are realizing they have to change on their level? Quick slide for you to the, quite frankly, to our good friends in the NFL who were on the opposite side entirely on the issue of the Colin Kaepernick and his taking one knee, and where it was viewed as such a horrific thing for someone to do. And now they have come full circle because, I don't think because their conscience changed, but because I think someone in the breakout room said very eloquently that their backing, their financial underpinnings has changed. And they realize that it is in the best interest of their business to make this move. So we see things are happening on a societal scale, including something as large as the nation's corporations and others. At the same time, what's happening on a personal level? And to that, many of you tackled the question of cultural competency. And I think there was a wide swath of feedback in terms of how people feel, whether they are culturally competent, and in fact, how does that really play out in the real world? So with that, I'm going to step back and allow any of our participants, if they feel like taking the mic, if you will, and sharing your thoughts regarding the questions and maybe a particular aspect of one question. And maybe limit yourself to no more than about a minute if you can, so others can follow.
Robbi, I'm Gary. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Gary.
I just want to make one observation on your remark about the generations, X, Y, and Z. I believe that in some circumstances, you give them a lot more credit than I would. For example, it's the generations X, Y, and Z folks who have not masked themselves during the pandemic, who have gone to bars and beaches and infecting others. That doesn't show me a lot of respect for the larger society. I think there's a division within those generations themselves. There are those who are more culturally and societally aware and awake and respectful, and there are those who are not. That's my observation.
Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, this is Erica. While I wouldn't disagree with Gary, I would just say that I think it's a challenge to make broad generalizations, because I certainly know of a lot in the younger generation who are being very respectful of the pandemic, and yet also of this current topic. They're certainly teaching me a lot. And I would have to say, in terms of the three questions, the cultural awareness question, I feel like I'm learning a tremendous amount and able to employ that among my white family and friends, and wish that I had a more diverse friend base to talk to, because there are lots of people of color around me that I just don't know nearly as well and haven't had these kinds of conversations. With regard to the corporate world, I have a background in organizational change, and I know exactly what's going to be involved for them to actually change these systems. It can't be just window dressing or it'll come back to bite them. Are they changing their hiring policies? Are they putting different people in leadership? How are the people of color, the people of difference, and that's where my background started, people of difference, could be women as well as people of color, or any difference, treated in that organization? There are systems that keep them tied in place and disadvantaged that have got to change, and that's a big job. And then lastly, what can and should we do? I heard a very important writer whose name is escaping me say, you know, white people are always asking me, what can we do? What can we do? And she said, I've come to think of that. This was a person of color, that's not my job. The job is for each of us white people, to say, what are we willing to change? And my dilemma is right now, I feel like I am willing to be cognizant to the very best of my ability. I'm willing to work on my language, work on my assumptions. I'm willing to vote differently. I'm willing to engage in this issue in whatever way I can. I feel like my options to engage it are perhaps limited, and I wish I knew better how to engage. And that's enough for me.
I would like to say, as a priest at St. Paul's, that I often am given deference, which I have not earned. And I like to be on the same level as everybody else. But there is something that comes with being a priest. So the people that I know of color are not in my neighborhood. I know them from church, but we're not really on an equal level. And I would like to join a group of people with more African American people, where we can become friends and really tell the truth to each other and have no class difference or job difference or anything like that. That's what I would like to do.
Well, you know, we could start that with St. Luke's. Why are we not doing more combined? Why don't we have some Sundays where more of us go there and invite some of the members there? You know, once a month trade or whatever. I mean, I think we have a huge opportunity, and especially with the youth, to be able to combine. So I'd like to see us combine more. I mean, that's right there in our backyard almost. So that's my thought on something we could do.
However, many of the people there are from Africa, and they're trying to learn the language, but that's a real problem.
I'm concerned that we're moving off of our topic, which is us and how we as white people need to begin addressing issues, rather than how we can solve the problem by having more interactions with St. Luke's. What do we need to do? What do I need to do? How can I become more aware? This book has taught me that I am just beginning to even scratch the surface about my white privilege. I began reading that list of 46 specific items that the woman in one book had about, she had recited were white privilege. I really think it's important for us to keep on the very difficult topic of what do I need to become aware of and what do I need to change, rather than to leap to some idea that if we just got together with more Black people, everything would work out. I think that is a waste of our time for this level of conversation.
Agreed, Andrew. I think one thing that also people can really think about, you know, everyone here said, oh, I don't know Black people, or I don't have Black neighbors, or I don't have, you know, I'm not working in diverse places. I think, you know, one very practical thing you can do is the next time there's a house for sale or a condo for sale next to you, ask yourself, who have you recommended to say that? Have you said to your Black coworker, hey, there's a great place available for me? There are lots of little things that we can do and lots of little things that we don't do that perpetuate the same types of ideas and stereotypes and de facto segregation that we live in. So when we think about, oh, I wish I had Black friends, well, how have we asked ourselves and put ourselves out there to have more diverse people in our circles?
I think as a teacher, a high school teacher, for me, you know, it's a big interesting dynamic in a way, because realizing who I'm talking to and I'm teaching. I teach in inner city, you know, San Diego, downtown, and it's fantastic and I love it. But it's really, you know, it's no one else's work. I think a lot of people of color and a lot of differences, right, that Erica used. I love that. People have been working so hard for so long to figure it out and to help people of white. I think it's our turn to learn and listen and have the compassion and like understanding I'm constantly learning stuff, that I don't even realize. I'm part of this group, you guys are all commended for being part of this. You're trying. We're all trying, and I think that's huge. That means a lot, I think, for all of us.
Hey, I'd like to address what Pat said about St. Luke's. I've been working there for years now, teaching Sunday school, and I just don't show up and leave. I'm in relationships there with the parents of the kids, and it is worthwhile. It is worthwhile to, and I'm not talking about just throwing money at something needy or old clothes or that kind of thing. It is a place to be in relationship with people of a different culture, and it does help us. It does help us, and I really believe that what Pat said is very, very important and a possibility for many people.
Hey, Robbi, we're at the top of the hour. I just want to send you a reminder.
Thank you. Well, we can maybe take one or two more, and then we should close it out.
One of the things that I mentioned in my breakout group was that each of us has an area where we have some expertise, whether it be education, religious education, corporate affairs, justice, peace and justice work, whatever it is, and that if we keep this concern about racial justice, and if we keep this concern in our own forefront and just bring it to our own particular area of expertise or area of interest, it's like the gifts of the Holy Spirit. You work there, I work here. As long as we're working in the same direction, it can make a difference.
Robbi, could we possibly expand the breakout rooms to 30 minutes rather than 20?
We can do that. Okay, if I will, on that note, let's, since we are running out of time, we will keep both the opportunity for exchanges within the breakout room. We'll try to expand the time. And we'll also try to, this particular part of the conversations post breakout room, I think also needs as much time as we can get it as well. So we will try to do that as well. Quick programming note, as we move into the next chapters, chapters 29 through 40, the main headings for Debbie Irving is Leaving My Comfort Zone and Inner Work. And if you can get beyond that to her outer work, please try to get as far as that if you can in your readings. And perhaps very appropriate is that now we're moving into a category of how to be an anti-racist to some degree. So you may want to keep that in mind as we take a look at how Debbie has handled this issue in her own personal growth and awareness, but also how it plays out in the larger context of society. I'd like to thank you all, and if you will, if I may turn it over to Jeff for our parting prayer.
Thank you. And on that note, I'll just make one more mention of Sacred Ground, that in Sacred Ground, we knew this would just whet the appetite. It's a fantastic forum. Thank you, Robbi, for all your work in it. In Sacred Ground, you will have 2 full hours for conversation with a small group that will stay the same from session to session. So if you're feeling like this is just starting to scratch the surface, I hope that you will continue on into Sacred Ground, where you will have 2 hours with a small group to have deep, deep conversation around these issues for 10 sessions of 2 hours each. With that, let us pray. Gracious and holy God, we give you thanks for this community of learning, of truth-telling, and of vulnerability, where we can come together from week to week to learn more about this human family and share our experiences of each other in front of you, that we may be receptive to how you love all of us and how our common life together has both hurt us and helped us, and what we may do to spread your love more deeply among this whole human family, to knit us together in your holy arms. All these things we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.